All right, my clock says 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with some housekeeping. First and foremost, thank you everybody for joining us. I'd like to remind everybody who's a guest on the call today to please ensure you mute your microphones and turn off your video. And again, for those just joining us, if you have a question throughout the course of this discussion, please put it in the chat. We have moderators looking at the chat, and they will consolidate the questions, and we will open those up at the end. I'll ask your questions to the panel in the open Q&A after they've had a chance to answer the questions that we're going to go through. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Marianne Rojas, our Executive Director for Workforce Solutions East Texas. Marianne.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ResET, Reemploying East Texas. My name is Marianne Rojas, and I have the privilege of leading a team of dedicated workforce professionals in the operation of our workforce centers in East Texas. We are extremely grateful for the opportunity to provide a forum for conversation from subject matter experts on strategies to reemploy our workers and providing a safe entry into the workforce. I wish to thank our economic development partners who join us in sponsoring this event this morning, the Economic Development Corporations of Wills Point, Longview, cities of Van, Grand Saline, Emory, Edgewood, Mineola, Canton, and the Longview Economic Development Corporation. I just wish to thank you so much for your support. Today's session will focus on strategies for returning to work and includes a slate of highly regarded experts and state officials who will be participating in panel discussions. We will hear the results of a survey of unemployment claimants in East Texas and their view on returning to work. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions, so please use your chat feature to pose your questions. To start our session, we will hear words of encouragement from a very special guest. So at this time, I will turn to our moderator, Doug Shryock, who is the Executive Director for Workforce Solutions East Texas. Doug?
Thank you very much, Marianne. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all you've done to get us ready for this. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce our opening speaker. Matt Schaefer is a sixth-generation Texan and a member of the Texas House of Representatives. He represents both Tyler and Smith County in District 6 since 2013. He serves on the Appropriations and Higher Education Committees. He's been married to Jaslyn, who's the director of the TJC Apache Bells, for almost 19 years. Both are active at Green Acres Baptist Church over in Tyler. Together, they have a daughter, Quincy, and a son, Graham. I'm proud to say he's a fellow vet, a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. He's a 1630 with a downrange tour in Afghanistan in 2010. Just a little bit about him. After a football career at Cisco Junior College, he earned degrees at Texas Tech in both finance and law. He's self-employed, working in both real estate and law. Matt's a member of the Texas Freedom Caucus, and according to the group's website, the caucus aims to support liberty-minded grassroots Americans and Texans who want bold action to protect life, strengthen families, defend the U.S. and Texas Bill of Rights, restrain government, and revitalize personal and economic freedoms in the state of Texas. We need some of that. Empower Texans, a nonprofit organization focused on promoting free market principles, gave Representative Schaefer a score of 100% for the last 3 legislative sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce a brother in arms, both in uniform and in our current fight against COVID-19, Texas Representative Matt Schaefer.
Hey, Doug, thank you very much for that generous introduction. Maybe you could have just started with my wife's the director of the Tyler Junior College Apache Bells, and that would get a lot of attention around East Texas.
Absolutely.
Hey, listen, everybody out there, I want to say thank you, not only for Doug, what you and your team have been doing, Mary Ann, your team, working with us in my office, being an interface between hardworking Texans who are struggling to get unemployment, struggling to get answers about whether their business can open. It's been an extraordinary time for me and my office and my staff. So I want to thank you for being good partners and being very responsive. It has been an incredible experience for me dealing with, the extraordinary problems that are being created, a lot of that you can't even really anticipate by this event. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time talking to, Mayor Hines, Mayor Tyler, county judge, lots of local elected officials, talking to our hospital executives and doctors on a daily basis. One thing that I have been very diligent to do is make sure that we're not getting ahead of what our hospitals are telling us is acceptable. And let me give you a data point on that I pay attention to, and that's the number of people that have been hospitalized in Tyler at our two major hospital systems, really three, over the last few weeks, because that's really a critical stress point for our system. And we hit a high water mark on March the 31st of 63 patients hospitalized in Tyler for either positive COVID or suspected COVID illness. And as of yesterday, we were at 24. So we have not, since March 31st, it's fluctuated, it's gone up and down, but we have not reached that high water mark of 63 patients back on March 31st. And so I think that's a data point that's very instructive for the businesses and the people in the community here in Smith County to know that as we have reopened some business here locally, that we have not put an undue burden on our healthcare system. I do believe that there are many businesses that have plans in place that are doing what they can to make their customers feel safe. I want people to know that you've got to take this seriously. I take it seriously with me and my family. I think everybody should. That being said, we got to get people back to going to the doctor again. One of the big problems we had was people stopped going in to the doctor to get health care here locally. I mean, we had children who were not getting well visits, not going in to get shots, not going in to get checked up. Older people who were, just being stubborn and saying, I'm hurting and I'm not going in. Those things have an economic impact on us as well. On the Appropriations Committee, we've been having a lot of discussions internally about what the state budget's going to look like. A lot of that's going to depend on what Glenn Hegar, our Comptroller, tells us. But we know we're in for some tough budget decisions coming up. And it's really going to be a time that we have to look at our priorities. Public education has always been a priority. Places like the Workforce Commission, we got to make sure they've got the support they need to continue to serve the people that are unemployed and help the businesses that are dealing with this. Also another huge data point on the policymaking decision is whether our public schools open up, whether our colleges open up, and when. I will tell you that is a significant driver for our economy. When you look at the spending that occurs and the activity that occurs regarding our school activities, it's remarkable. You talk about, buses and cars and the things that drive demand for oil and gas, that all plays into it. So it's all connected. It's all connected. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're listening to local officials, that we're listening to our hospitals, that we're listening to our school officials about what we could do to help them and having a plan. And obviously, we are listening to business owners and people who have been affected by this. I've taken some of the most heartbreaking phone calls from business owners, from individuals, from barbers and cosmetologists. And those things have a deep impact on me and making sure that I stay leaning into my job to get information to Austin and to get information from Austin back to us here. With that being said, I just appreciate everybody out there that's working to keep our economy going, and that we can find policies going forward that help the recovery and not hinder it. And Doug, I'll turn it back to you all and just say thank you very much for letting me join you this morning.
Thank you, Representative. You've got a vision, you know what we need, and it's good to know you're there working for us on our behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could turn it back to Tim Smith, but I'd like to let you know who Tim is. Tim is our Business Services Manager for the Workforce Solutions East Texas. I'm proud to say he's also a vet. He's a Mustang with over 20 years in the Nuclear Air Force. Tim?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the introduction. We sent out a survey to approximately 16,000 East Texans who are drawing unemployment. About 6,300 of those unfortunately rejected because of outdated email addresses. But the good news is we got 10,000 people to successfully get that survey, and about 14% responded. The survey was designed to assess employees' willingness to and readiness to return to work should their employer make them an offer. As you can see on the slide, approximately 12% of the employees were participating in the shared work program, which was relatively small. 81% of the respondents either experienced full or partial layoff, with only 7% permanently losing their positions. Of those respondents receiving unemployment, 80% were full-time employees, with 17% part-time. 61% of the respondents are receiving unemployment insurance and the disaster unemployment insurance, and 39% are not receiving compensation. This 39% are likely to accept employment immediately when offered, which is encouraging for our small businesses because that group is not receiving anything at this time, and they're needing to fill that void. Interestingly, the survey reveals majority of employers have not communicated their intent to reopen at this time, and we would encourage small businesses to communicate with those that have been laid off. Communicate your intentions and gauge their willingness to come back. Take a look at the slides that we left a link for, and you can get a feel for the lack of communication. 93% of those respondents expressed that they're definitely willing to return to work or willing to return to work with safety measures in place. Again, this is encouraging because those who have been laid off, many of them were feeling the effects first time of losing a job and not being self-sufficient. That is hugely impactful on people's lives. They would much rather draw a paycheck, even if it's less than what they're making, drawing unemployment, because quite frankly, they want to be self-sufficient. They don't want to rely on that check coming in or that check being cut off at some point in the future and having a very uncertain future ahead of them. This slide shows the top 5 industries. Other services, which includes the hair salons, as Representative Schaefer said, barbers, mechanics, pet care, vets, and cleaners. So those ancillary businesses were hardest hit, and that's also where a lot of your lower wage employees are working. So emphasis on bringing those employees back into employment is important. Education and healthcare, dentists and specialty clinics were especially hard hit in this. Because they were mostly considered elective type of procedures and not necessary for continuation of service. Leisure and hospitality, those are your food service employees, your hotel employees, again, lower end of the spectrum on wage scale. So some effort has to be made in this effort to bring those folks back. The big elephant in the room is going to be the oil and gas, which we started to see an uptick in layoffs and closures ahead of the COVID-19 event. This is going to be the enduring piece that we're going to have to pay particular attention to as we emerge from this, and the folks that get called back, go back to work. Those folks in the oil industry are going to be perpetually unemployed at this point if the oil market continues its plummet. And we'll have to start looking at ways to bring those folks back into alternative industries, cross-training through WIOA, et cetera. We'll look at opportunities to do that. And lastly is the professional and business services. These results closely mirror the consistent top 5 that we've been tracking through my weekly UI impact report that many of you get. And we anticipate a quick return of many of these employees for reasons stated before. This is the first time a lot of folks have ever drawn unemployment, and that's encouraging because that drive to go back to work is still deeply rooted within East Texas workforce. The top 5 reasons that people expressed in not wanting to return are health reasons pre-existing or risk of another outbreak of the disease. Lack of childcare is one of the bigger ones, and we're hearing a lot of that locally, just with providers struggling to take care of the essential personnel's children and not having the capacity to bring on additional people. So that's going to be one of the struggling points we're going to work through. The 2 common points in unlikely and definitely will not return were pre-existing before this event, and that was poor work environment and lack of hours. Again, this is a population from the workforce system that we'll look at targeting to improve skill and take a look at those emerging new trends in trade where we can start training people to do telecommute or take advantage of technology and increase their skills and make them more valuable and help them ascend the wage ladder. And with that, Doug, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tim, very much. I appreciate it. Good information, but it's a lot to digest. Fortunately, we have a number of guest speakers with us, experts in their fields, and rather than take my time, I'd like to turn it over to them. I'd like to begin with Glenn Hegar. Glenn is the 36th Texas Comptroller overseeing the world's 10th largest economy. What exactly is that? Well, my audience probably knows given the business minds they have, but you know, he's Texas Chief Financial Officer. He's the state's treasurer, check writer, tax collector, procurement officer, and revenue estimator. His focus is on constitutional duties and is committed to improving customer service and transparency. He believes that a less burdensome tax system will foster a better environment for job creation and business expansion. Before his current assignment, Glenn served in the Texas House of Representatives and in the Texas Senate. In his last session as state senator, he oversaw state and local revenue matters and helped cut $1 billion worth of taxes. He's a 1993 graduate of Texas A&M University. I'm pausing there for the whoops. But he also earned his Master's of Arts in Law degree at St. Mary's University. He and his wife, Dara, strive to instill their core values of hard work, honesty, and integrity in their 3 children, Claire, Julia, and Jonah. He says that despite his accomplishments, his most important title is one we can all relate to and admire. He's their dad. Ladies and gentlemen, Texas Comptroller, Mr. Glenn Hegar.
Thank you, Doug. It's good to be with you this morning, and happy to be on this panel. A lot of great people are also serving on the panel, so I'll try not to take too much time because I certainly want to hear what they have to say as well. You know, I'll just give a couple of quick comments looking back at what we have in the Texas economy as of today. If we flash back, which seems like a very long time ago, back to February of this year, Texas had a strong economy, 50,000 job gains in February alone. The revenues into the state treasury were tracking slightly ahead of the estimates that we had provided the legislature last year. Things were really good. However, unfortunately, as was mentioned by some earlier already on this presentation, is that we've had a double hit here in Texas. Obviously, the global pandemic, the economic shutdowns, not just here in Texas, the United States, but most countries around the world. And then prior to that, disagreement between Saudi Arabia and Russia as far as oil production cuts. And unfortunately, the Saudis decided not to cut, but to increase production. So that sent oil prices down very rapidly in a quick ascension. Unfortunately, their decline in the month of March. And so the point being is Texas, if you look back through history, has outpaced the national average in the last decade in economic growth and GDP growth. And again, That's all 254 counties, 12 economic regions. Some regions do a little better, some do a little worse, depending on the type of economic mix that are in those regions. But as a state, we've outpaced the national average. If you look at the unfortunate pandemic that we're in now, you know, I remind people a couple things. One, Texas is probably going to see slower economic growth than some of our sister states for a shorter period of time before we get back to that faster growth rate than we've had of the national average, really for three reasons. One, it's the global pandemic. Number two, unfortunately, we're impacted a little bit more, whether it's in the Permian Basin, the Houston area, portions of East Texas, because of the lower downturn in oil prices and natural gas prices. And then thirdly, I remind people that Texas, as one of the 50 states of the entire United States, we are 19% of all of the exports out of the United States. And I highlight that often, again, just to show that we're very intertwined to the economic economy of the entire globe. And so therefore that slowdown is probably going to impact us with greater headwinds right now than other states. As Representative Schaefer mentioned earlier, you know, I provide the legislature with an estimate of how much money we think will come in the Treasury. I made an announcement earlier in March, and I've continued to say that we need a couple of months of economic data to see how much this decline in economic activity is impacting the state treasury. However, with that being said, we plan to do an official revision of what we think is the estimate for this current 2-year budget, and remind everyone that the current 2-year budget the legislature passed in the last year in the legislative session goes through August of next year. And so when I do provide that revision in July, and I wanted to get a couple months data, but to just give you a couple of data points real quick, for collections last month in April, I talked more about sales tax and other revenue streams. And the reason for that is of all tax collections in the state of Texas, sales tax is roughly 57 to 58% of all the tax collections. So that's much more important to the state than it is maybe to local governments, for example. However, in April, those collections were made in March, and as you know, we went to social distancing partway through, more so the latter part of the month. So we feel as though the collections that we have reported to us in May, which were actually collected from businesses in April, will show much steeper declines in sales tax. However, give you just a couple of data points real quick. Motor vehicle and sale rental taxes last month were down 45% in April compared to April the year of 2019. Now that was our largest drop going back down all the way to 1983. Hotel occupancy taxes, and many of you may have seen that hotels across the nation have had about 22 to 23% occupancy rate. That's moved up last week to 28%. So most hotels don't have a lot of people in them. And we had a 63% decline, which was the deepest drop that we've had going back to 1990. We had, because of restaurants, bars were closed because of social distancing, alcohol beverage taxes were down 55. And most of that was because most of the receipts come in from mixed beverage sales. And again, those are at restaurants and bars. And so the point being is we've seen historic drops, and that's not just here in Texas, but that's been in governments all around the world. And just a couple other numbers real quick, just to point out, we've been looking at a lot of non-traditional economic data because we don't have those revenue sources yet, as they are lagging a little bit in collections and coming in the Treasury. So we can get a much bigger picture of what's going on. Sales tax was down last month 9.3% compared to April the year before, but we expect it'll be substantially lower coming this month when we report that out at the end of May. Just to remind people, unfortunately, this has had an impact on businesses. It's had an impact on individuals here in the state of Texas. And I know Commissioner will mention this at Workforce Commission. They've been doing a significant amount of work over there trying to handle all the unemployment claims. But unfortunately, we've had 1.9 million in Texas, and almost 37 million people in the United States have filed unemployment claims. So we have significant headwinds. My office is trying to make sure to work with businesses one-on-one. Those that are trying to file, we encourage everybody to file their tax reports. We encourage them to pay the taxes because most of those have been collected from us, the taxpayers, and the businesses hold them in trust until they're able to remit them to us. And then in turn, for sales taxes, I send them back to local governments. I send back to 1,633 local governments across the state of Texas their portion of sales tax. And so I do have the authority in a disaster declaration to be able to postpone the timing of those payments. However, this is very different than any other type of events we've had, such as hurricanes, whether it's a hailstorm event, some type of a natural disaster, where usually that's isolated to a certain region of the state of Texas. However, obviously this disaster declaration has been for all 254 counties. And so it did not seem very prudent to be able to postpone all tax collections for sales tax specifically for up to 90 days for every business, for every county and every region across the state, when some are continuing to do economically well. And I don't have the ability to pick and choose between which industry sectors that deferral would apply to. So what I've said is we're doing it on a case-by-case basis, which is a lot more work for my team. However, we're trying to make sure to work with those businesses and give them a little bit of time if they're not able to pay them, but we're encouraging them to, because again, we send that to 1,633 local jurisdictions. And then also we've been working with the governor's office as well as Department of Emergency Management, because Texas, the state as well as local governments have received $11.2 billion in funding from the federal government in COVID package number 3. 55% of that is for the state of Texas, that is directly related to COVID type expenses. 45% of that was to local governments. The largest 18 cities and counties could go directly to the U.S. Treasury to get that money sent to them. However, the rest of the communities have to wait on Texas to pass that through. So Department of Emergency Management stood up with their website last week, and they are the ones we're going to send the money over to them, and then they're dispersing that to each of the local entities here in Texas that did not fit that large population bracket to be able to go to state to the U.S. Treasury. Also, we've been working on a lot of issues that we have potentially to do what's called a municipal liquidity program that the federal government has set up for about $500 billion in potential loans to local governments that need those dollars. If you're a certain size and above, you can again go to the U.S. Treasury for that program. But most communities, most cities, most counties and state do not fit that category. So therefore, in essence, the state would be the borrower and loan those dollars to the local governments. Now, there's some constitutional issues that we've been trying to work through, some constraints here in Texas. I do a weekly call with the other 49 treasurers in the nation. Most of the other states are not going to utilize that program because they think that it's a little bit too risky for the states to be able to essentially loan to the local governments and make sure, because the states would be liable at the end of the 3 years to pay that money back. We're continuing to work through that process to try to find a program that we think would work just in case we need it, because I think we need all the tools in the toolbox, not just to help the state through this, not just to help local governments through this, but also to help individuals and businesses through this as well. So there's a lot of different things that we're trying to deal with, and one of the things that I talk all the time about, whether it's to legislators, whether it's to leadership, or whether it's to the public on events like this, is that, I've served in the legislature for several years. I've been through a downturn in 2003. I've been through a downturn in the state Senate as well in 2011. So I know how difficult these times are for the legislature and how difficult they are in the public, because I've been through them personally as a legislator. So part of my job is to manage expectations that when we do a revision in July, unfortunately, we think that revision is going to be downward of billions of dollars. But you also had to put that in perspective. The Texas state budget is $126 billion. So much of a revision pretty quickly equals billions of dollars. However, that is going to be a significant impact for legislators. And so we're working through staying in constant communication, because I want to make sure we manage expectations that this is a significant downturn. I've said before that this is probably going to be equal to or worse as a contraction far as a legislative budget cycle than the 2011, and 2011 was very difficult. However, we do have a large economic stabilization fund, or a rainy day fund. I think the legislature will have about $8.5 billion in that fund when we get back into session in January of next year, which is quite substantial compared to what other states have. And so my point is we're trying to make sure to analyze not only the economic data and inform the legislature and the public, but also to make sure to find every tool in the toolbox that we can get through this downturn on the state level, the local level, as well as businesses and individuals. And so I'll stop there and happy to pass it off to the next panelist.
Mr. Hegar, thank you. As our Chief Financial Officer, you've hit all the points that we really wanted to talk to. You talked about the impact we were going to be having on our state revenues, our taxes coming in. You talked about the impact on local governments, which is where we all live. And also where we're going. You talked about the disaster fund. You also talked about historic drops, and you talked about localized disasters. Have you ever seen anything of this magnitude, or how would you compare it to what's the long-term outlook for us here in Texas?
You know, if you get several months out, and let's say several months out to the next year and a half, and the reason I say year and a half is I wish it would be the next 2 to 3 months. However, if you look back, we look back at the great financial crisis, for example, there 07, 08, 09, Texas had an impact just like everybody else. We looked at our revenue streams, and immediately there was a drop in our motor vehicle sales tax collections because people just didn't go and buy new automobiles. And actually those drops lasted for about a year and a half. And that drop was about 18% for that year and a half. And then if you look at sales tax, there was a lag of about 6 months before we started seeing negative impacts to the sales tax receipts. And when it did hit negative, it was negative for about 9.5% for 14 months. Now, my point being now is that there's not a lag, unfortunately, in sales tax receipts because it's been so immediate with so many businesses that have stopped large portions of their economic activity. And so the impacts are going to be quicker and deeper. However, you know, we hope, obviously, again, we're so tied to the national and the global economy, and a lot of this depends on what's happening in other countries. I use one example. I was talking to several folks in the automobile industry last week, and say, for example, some of the manufacturers wanted to get started again with production as of last Monday, not the one we just passed, but the week before that, almost 2 weeks ago. However, they couldn't because of supply chain issues in other countries that are also having lockdowns. And so the point being is, you know, we have a word that we use in my office quite often. It's called complicated. The economy and the impacts of this are very, very complicated, and it's hard to pull one string out or one data point. And so the point being is, you know, this is all intertwined. And so what we've seen is impacts already in the hotel industry, the leisure industry, the tourism industry, the restaurants, the bars, retail is in the mining industry with oil and gas. There's going to continue to be some ripple effects, unfortunately. And so no, there has not been one event that is a good look to be an example to this one. But I continue to say also, again, you know, Texas started this with a much stronger foundation economically than most other states, so that we are blessed in. Also, we have a large state savings account, which we are very blessed in. Also, that we have a lot of very determined people in Texas that want to get back to work. You know, small business is the backbone of the Texas economy, the backbone of the economic engine that we've had for so many years in the last decade. And, you know, as long as we can try to make sure from a regulatory and a tax perspective, to make sure that we work with them as best we can to get them back to work, because that's what everybody wants to do as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could turn the attention a bit to our next speaker. Carlton Schwab has been president and CEO of the Texas Economic Development Council since February of 1999. He's built it into a powerful voice for economic development policy in the state of Texas. As president and CEO of TEDC, he served on the Select Committee for Economic Development. He was the chair of the Advisory Committee of the Texas Legislative Conference, a member of the Board of the Council of Development Finance Agencies, and was recently named as a founding board member of the Clean Texas Advisory Board, an organization designed to accelerate clean tech industry here in Texas. Prior to his tenure at TEDC, Mr. Schwab was Director of Development at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. From '89 to '96, Mr. Schwab was Director of the Deloitte Consulting and also served as Vice President of the Lubbock Board of City Development. Mr. Schwab holds a master's degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin and a bachelor's degree from Austin College in Sherman, Texas. Mr. Schwab, if I could direct a little bit of the questioning, the effects of COVID and business disruption seem to have hurt smaller businesses in rural communities. How do you see the economic development and workforce development organizations working together to help re-entry into the workforce?
Thank you, Doug. And Mary Ann, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion today. I really appreciate it. And to your question, Doug, it's heartbreaking to see what's going on in many of our small communities, with the small business sector. I can't begin to tell you just what our members tell us about just the tragedies that are occurring in the local business community. One of the things that I'm heartened to see is that our economic development corporations at the local level have found ways to create revolving loan funds, business grant programs, all kinds of different business assistance efforts to help the local business community in their area. It's really been amazing. If you go to our website, we've already listed 15, perhaps even now more. In fact, we've got a webinar going right now where communities from the size of Sealy to Fort Worth are comparing what they're doing for their small business sectors. So it's a great thing to see. Our economic development community is responding to the needs of their communities. Economic development is a decidedly local endeavor in our state, and it's great to see them respond and figure out ways to get people back to work and to help the small businesses, as Comptroller Hegar said a little bit earlier, are such a driver in the Texas economy. In terms of workforce development organizations, I think we have the greatest workforce development programs in the country. Those programs, the Skills Development Fund, the High Demand Job Training Program, the JET program, I think we have 25 career and technical training centers in the state funded by EDCs, by local school districts, by community college districts. We have the infrastructure in our workforce world to respond to this crisis over time. What we need now is to see in terms of new business activity, we need to see more certainty in terms of the health of Texans. Once we see that, there are many companies that are still looking at the state of Texas. There are companies that began looking at Texas to reshore their activities from China, from other parts of the world, into Texas, or certainly back into the United States to take advantage of NAFTA. We're going to see a lot of opportunities. This is very heartening. We should all be enthusiastic about the opportunities that we will see in the future related to NAFTA and related to reshoring. So now's not the time to be pulling back on workforce programs. Now's not the time to be pulling back on local economic development efforts. If anything, it's to re-emphasize the importance of those programs, of those efforts. If you think about in Texas, the manufacturing crescent really goes from north of Georgetown up through the Metroplex and then over to Texarkana. It follows I-35 really to the Red River, and then it goes east along I-30 and I-20. There's going to be tremendous opportunities once we get through the pandemic, and a lot of these opportunities are related to reshoring. A lot of them are related to the fact that we were seeing this kind of interest and development, a lot of it related to the automotive industry as well. What we didn't have prior to the pandemic was labor availability. I can think of Sulphur Springs, for example, a real hotbed of manufacturing development, but really was at the point early this year where they really couldn't attract any more industry because they simply didn't have enough employees in their labor shed. That's all changed now. We've got these great programs. We've got a great work ethic. We have the best people in the country in terms of ready to work and willing to work and the environment in our labor force is unparalleled. So, you know, what we have to do is get confidence restored in people going back into businesses. We have to get, we frankly need a lot of testing, because companies aren't going to expand or relocate here if there's any kind of fear that they're going to hire someone who could infect a manufacturing workshop floor. So the more testing we get, the more certainty we get, the better our chance at recovering and recovering quickly. So I'm positive that we will return stronger than ever, but I fear it's going to be a long slog. I think the Comptroller basically implied that. He may not have said it directly, but we will be ready, and we have the programs and the infrastructure in support of the people that work in this state to respond and to recover quickly and in a robust fashion.
Thank you, President Schwab. Good insight. You hit so many things that I was asking about. You talked about new business activity. You talked about opportunities, labor availability, which is a key word. You and Comptroller Hegar also talked about local. I really appreciate locality, because we live locally. Do you sense that there's a skills gap? Is there still a skills gap? And if there is, what can we do to prepare for these businesses wanting to come in? What can we do to address it with the testing? But are there new jobs on the horizon? Do we shift our focus in the type of these jobs?
You know, really great questions. When I was reading this yesterday, I was thinking to myself, how in the heck am I going to answer that question? We don't know. I don't think we know yet what kind of jobs will return. I'm thinking, you know, what I read is there's going to be more automation. So we're going to have to address this, perhaps a skills gap that develops in terms of having folks work with automation, understanding automation. You know, in all likelihood, the trends that have been occurring for 50 years, and that is a larger amount of capital investment in a plant and facility and fewer employees, perhaps more high-paid employees. But still, I think that the pandemic has only accelerated that. I can't see that. I see that as certainly a result of what we're living through right now. But again, I feel confident that our workforce infrastructure at both local and regional level and the state level, with the great state programs that we have, will be able to address the company that's expanding or reshoring, perhaps from China or from other part of the world, that wants to take advantage of the NAFTA trade alliance, that they'll come in and say, look, we're only going to have 50 employees, but they're going to make $100,000 a year. We need help in training those employees. We need to bring them into the middle of the 21st century, even though it's 2020. And I feel confident that with the resources at the local level, with the great state programs that we have, that we can accomplish this, and we can accomplish it quickly, and do it to bring Texans back to work.
Great, thank you, sir. That was a tough question. I didn't write it, but you handled it well.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could switch to our next presenter. Ms. Kelly Hall is President and CEO of the Longview Chamber of Commerce, which also manages the Convention and Visitors Bureau, 100 acres of Heritage Main Street, and Keep Longview Beautiful. She holds a marketing degree from the University of Central Oklahoma and has served as president at 3 different chambers prior to beginning her current position. As a result of the strategic partnerships Ms. Hall has forged, the Longview Chamber has experienced an increase in dues revenue of nearly 28% since 2005. Ms. Hall earned honors as the Western Association of Chamber of Commerce's Executive of the Year, received her Certified Chamber Executive certification from the American Chamber of Commerce Executives. She served on several state and regional association boards and is currently serving on the Texas Chamber of Commerce Executives, the Texas Association of Business, the Leadership Texas Committee of the Board, and the Western Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives and the Foundation Boards. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Kelly Hall. As I get you going, Miss Hall, I'd like to focus you also on the types of assistance being provided to businesses. We talked, President Schwab talked about local, what's being provided to businesses by the local chambers. What are some specific measures they've taken to assist local businesses? What are the barriers also that those local businesses are facing as they try to reopen?
Great question, thank you. One of the things that we do best is to be able to quickly leverage the relationships we've built over the years. As a result, we were able to organize and produce virtual webinars with presenters from the SBA. We've had the SBDC a couple of times. We had U.S. Senator John Cornyn, our state senator Brian Hughes. We also were able to bring in the U.S. Chamber and other organizations that have the resources to walk us through how to deal with our current local predicament. And as a result, East Texas received its fair share of, especially in the first round, of PPP loans. In East Texas, our average loan was right at $204,000. And we had businesses calling us saying, thank you, because you did the webinar so quickly and you brought the experts in to guide us through this process. We knew how to visit with our bankers. We knew how to complete the applications. We knew what to do, how to prepare ourselves to go into those first meetings and have the discussions that needed to take place. And so I really just want to thank those individuals and those organizations that stepped up so quickly to respond to the needs in East Texas, because these were businesses, small in our market. A large business is 250 employees or 500 employees, but that's deemed a small business in many scenarios. So PPP and the EIDL loans were fantastic. The message we're getting out today is those companies, those contractors, those 1099 employees, go ahead and make application because money is still available. The average loan now is running about $36,000. Monies are still available in the last round. They had predicted those monies to be gone by last Thursday, and they're still available. So we are still encouraging our business to community to look at their financial needs, understand their cash flow, and look 6 to 8 months down the road. What are we hearing today is some companies are saying, Kelly, we haven't even touched our PPP money. We may return it. And I'm saying, don't return the money yet. Because we heard our state comptroller talk about the oil and gas, the resource market. We've begun to see layoffs. That's the reality in East Texas. We are seeing layoffs at companies related to the oil and gas industry as well as COVID. So what typically happens is we have about a 6-month boomerang effect. In 6 months, we'll see, I think that's when we'll start really realizing the impact of the oil and gas industry in our market. And then in 6 more months, I think we'll start boomeranging back slowly as oil prices start to recover. So as the chamber, we need to be willing to understand what's happening in the marketplace. Barriers, great question. Childcare. The lack of childcare is preventing reopening. Homeschooling. I had a discussion this week with, I'm on a board in our area, And 4 of our primary job employers are looking at reopening. Their intention is to reopen mid-July. They have, their operators are working, but people are working remotely. Well, a lot of these companies have shared office spaces. So now they're going back and looking at their infrastructure and reviewing the capital that's on hand to make the shift to where people are not working in co-working environments any longer. So as we had those discussions, and they're working 7 on, 7 off, or a 4-4-5 shift. And sometimes we forget the impact of the 2 professional household with no childcare and having to homeschool with these types of hours adds an additional stress, an additional risk of mental health, and that's the reality. So we're looking at those barriers as well and helping our primary employers to understand the ripple effect of their shift work and the other businesses that have professionals that are trying to figure out their reopen. And I was so thrilled to hear, especially one of our companies said, we're dealing with that too, because our 2 professional households are right here in our own district, and they can't get their people back to work. So a couple of our companies, the reality is said even, we may be looking at a November reopen date based on what schools do. So we have to understand our local predicament. I just so enjoyed the frankness of our state comptroller of dealing with the facts, because that's what we're dealing with here locally. And we've got to know how to lift up those companies. Another big concern or a barrier is litigation. And companies are very concerned that they may not know, we don't know who are asymptomatic carriers of the virus. We don't know where our employees have been. Companies have asked employees not to leave a 100-mile radius if they're taking vacations. But again, these may be asymptomatic carriers coming back into the workplace and someone gets sick. And the reality is companies are saying we've got to mitigate as many risks as possible during this time. And if we're afraid of litigation until something happens at the federal level, we're going to be very cautious in our reopening strategies. And that's another reality. So our organization, we are very plugged into several national policy organizations. And we're working on this from several different fronts of how can we ensure we get Congress to pass something that prevents litigation. That's another risk factor. What I do believe to be true about East Texas, I know we are a get things done region. We will find solutions and we will make the adjustments and we will come back better on the other side, but it's going to be a tough couple of years.
Kelly, I appreciate it. I mean, we need straight talk. We need to really look at the facts, and you laid them out as our other speakers have. You talked about layoffs. You talked about oil and gas, and I in no way can dismiss or diminish oil and gas. As much as I like low gas prices, there are some ways I'm wishing for a little bit higher, but some of that is in Saudi and Russia's hands, and we're coping with it. Can you talk, you also though talked about small businesses, 1099 employees, and childcare. And frankly, childcare is small business. And it's sometimes not so small. If a school has 12 or 15 teachers, they're one of our larger employers in some of our smaller areas. Have you seen any local trends, and are there some sectors that or businesses that are being more impacted than others? And for example, I'm looking at, is there an increase in small or female owned or other minority businesses that are being disproportionately impacted?
I believe so. I don't have enough data yet to give you a factual statement. I can give you observations. Number one is we've been reaching out to our 1,100 plus members the last 60 days. We've started recalling those companies now because what their number one priority 60 days ago may not be that priority today. So we're really trying to understand through their lenses what their critical points are, and then align that with the resources and the relationships, the influencers we can connect with them. We are seeing companies, especially those 1 and 2 shop. I'll give you my vacuum cleaner place after 20-something years shut their door. I'm like, I can't even buy my vacuum cleaner bags locally anymore. The spas around town, those are small businesses, sometimes sole proprietorships that have stricter sanitization and health code regulations and they're still not open. Some of those most restricted businesses are the last to come back online, and we just don't understand the why behind that. We may never understand the why behind that. And when we look at who owns those types of businesses, they're predominantly female-owned businesses, especially the sole proprietorships. So salons, thank goodness they reopened back up last Friday, but spas are still not opened. So I reached out to one of my elected officials and I said, help me understand why this type of business can't reopen, and they can't answer that question. It's because the focus was making sure essential services, our manufacturing, the universities, whatever that was, were staying open to the best of their ability. But we forgot about those that were already highly regulated that could have stayed open. I mean, it's a tough call.
It's a tough call, and I just happen to be looking at the chats as we go through, and I see the phrase catch-22. We want to open, we want to get started, but we want to be safe, and we've got to balance them somewhere. Thank you, Ms. Hall. In respect to our audience's time, I'd like to move on, if I could, and talk to our next panelist. Chuck Vanderbilt is the East Texas Council of Governments Regional Lending Manager. Chuck is responsible for directing and planning, coordinating financial and other administrative support services for the East Texas Regional Development Company's small business loan programs, and also the Community Loan Center Consumer Micro Loan Program. He also leads a team of professionals to secure several economic and environmental grant programs for the benefit of East Texas. Chuck, I'm going to jump right into it. Are there other funding sources, given your expertise, your background, for small businesses that have not applied for the PPP or EIDLs?
Yes, absolutely. I do want to point out, as Kelly said, there is still funding available through the PPP funds. And if you feel like you're eligible, we do encourage businesses to apply for that. But in addition to those specific loan programs, there's also the debt relief component to the CARES Act. So if you apply for an SBA 7A loan, an SBA 504 loan, it is approved and those funds are dispersed between now and September 27th of 2020. They still fall under the CARES Act debt relief, meaning the SBA is going to pay your principal, interest, and fees for 6 months upon your approval and the loan disbursement. Again, the key there is approval and that the loan is fully dispersed before September 27th, 2020. So I do want to point that out. And, that debt relief is still available to small businesses out there. In addition, without the debt relief component, your SBA 7A, your SBA 504 loan, both provide small businesses with low fixed interest financing. And that can be really helpful for small businesses to lock in a low interest rate, a fixed rate, so you bring some stability to that payment. And if your loan were to close this month, you're talking about a rate that's below 2.8% fixed for up to 25 years. So that can really free up some much needed cash flow for small businesses that are experiencing pains due to COVID-19. In addition to the SBA programs, my office also manages some EDA grant programs. We are working diligently to tap into some grant funds so that we can bring in an economic development specialist that is essentially a COVID-19 response specialist that we can put out into our community to assess the needs, to develop a plan to address those needs, and line up the grant funding needed to meet those needs. So through the SBA, through the EDA, my office is working really hard with small businesses to do what we can to put those federal dollars to work here in East Texas for the economic betterment for our region. So I do encourage, folks, if you're unsure about dealing with the SBA, that type of thing, reach out to my office. We'll get you through those hoops. We will help you. We will assist you in getting those funds. And that's really the goal of my office, is to have an impact here in East Texas. We're an access point to capital that comes from federal dollars, and we really want to put that to work here in the East Texas region.
Chuck, you're talking about the COVID response. Let's talk about essential services. Are there specific financial assistance packages or routes for businesses that provide those essential services?
Absolutely. Obviously my office is here to support small businesses throughout the ETCOG's 14 counties. But I do also want to point out that small business development centers cover not only every county in Texas, but nationwide. Here in our East Texas region, we have a small business development center offices in Longview, Athens, Mount Pleasant, Tyler, and they are your boots on the ground for the SBA to help small businesses access these COVID response funds from the CARES Act. And they're there, they're willing to work with you one-on-one at no cost to the small business. So if you've not reached out to your local small business development center, I really highly recommend that you do so. If you're not sure who is or which office represents your county, please feel free to reach out to my office and I will happily point you in the right direction. My phone has been ringing off the hook the past couple of months, and I would say a fair amount of those calls get referred to their local small business development center because they are tremendous in what they do, and they are the best access point to get assistance, direct assistance in accessing these funds. There's also a SCORE office in Tyler that provides a mentorship. And then, again, I just circle back, please reach out to my office. That's what we're here for. Even if your issue, what you're looking at doesn't fit one of my programs that I manage in my office, I'm happy to listen to you and point you in the right direction so that you can get to the solution you're looking for as quickly as possible.
Good information, Chuck. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the things you'll notice on most town halls is that there's a gimmick to keep the audience involved. We keep one of our best to the last. No disrespect to any of our other panelists, but someone who is equal to the talent you've already seen is Commissioner Aaron Demerson. Commissioner Demerson is Commissioner representing employers for Texas Workforce Commission. Governor Abbott appointed him to the 3-member commission in August of 2019. And prior to his appointment, Commissioner Demerson served as the director of the Office of Employer Initiatives at TWC. He also served as a senior advisor to Governor Rick Perry and as executive director of the Economic Development and Tourism Division in the governor's office, leading a team that marketed the state of Texas as a premier destination, both for business and travel. That will be there again. He also served as director of the Texas Business Development. The commissioner has a BBA in finance from Texas A&M University at Kingsville. He received a general banking diploma from the American Institute of Banking and is a 91-92 graduate of Leadership Austin. Although it's not listed on his TWC profile, I happen to know that the commissioner is also an Air Force vet. He was stationed at Scott Air Force Base, where he was negotiating international contracts and landing rights worldwide from the get-go. Commissioner, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And let me just say, in regards to all of our veterans that are out there, thank you for the work that you guys have done. I've not had an opportunity to serve, but appreciate the work that you guys have been doing in that regard. We'll never forget our veterans. Let me just say, first of all, thank you to Representative Schaefer, Comptroller Hegar for having them on the call. The gentlemen that are doing fantastic work, especially in this situation. And that's something that we're blessed with here in Texas is leadership. Governor Abbott appointed me to this position in August of 2019, and we appreciate the leadership that the governor has exhibited through all of this as we safely and strategically take our approach to reopening as well. The other elected officials and the employers that are on this call, this meeting, thank you for what you're doing. We don't take your investment in our state for granted. We appreciate the investment that's been made to our state in major ways. Let me, I guess, Doug, are you going to go to the questions, or do you want me to proceed forward?
Well, I can direct you, but you are my boss, sir. Commissioner, we realize the pressure that is on the workforce system right now, especially in regard to spike in unemployment claims. Many of our employment services personnel have been redirected over with, I believe, some 2,000 additional UI caseworkers being put on the job. How is the system overall holding up, and what's the agency done to prepare for the next wave? We know it's coming, which is returning to work.
It's been unprecedented. You'll hear that word over and over. Just to put that in perspective, 2.5 million claims that have been filed as of May the 13th. You take from March to May the 13th, 2.5 million claims. 2.2 million of those are COVID-related claims that have been filed. $5.6 billion that we've paid out. That includes the federal money that's been paid out as well. And of that 5.6, 3.8 billion of that is tied to the federal part of that package, that additional $600 that's been placed out there. 3 years worth of claims that we've had in a 3-month time period. And so imagine that 3 years worth in a 3-month time period is staggering, to say the least. The phone calls that have been coming in, over 1 million calls a day, that's on average, compared to about 13,000 calls that you would have in a normal situation. And so unprecedented in terms of the calls that we received. I think the highest number that we received on history had been about 60,000. That may have been tied to another disaster that hit our state, but 60,000 compared to what we're seeing right now has been pretty unprecedented. What we're doing to take steps to counter that, to be proactive with that, we've gone from 4 call centers in Texas to 8 call centers. That 4 additional private call centers that are out there. We've gone from hours of operation 7 days a week, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. as well. We've instituted a chat bot that we aptly call Larry. That's in honor of our former executive director, Larry. And that chat box is actually moving forward, helping us with AI type intelligence to answer questions and to anticipate. And so we've been basically doing what we can to make a difference in big. And so those extended hours are allowing us to answer and address those phone calls. A lot of volunteers within the agency that are in other divisions have been jumping on board to help. And it's been all hands on deck to truly try to make a difference.
Commissioner Tim Smith mentioned it before. Our workers, our employees want to get back to work. How would you advise our employers to engage in recruitment and then, of course, retention?
So recruitment and retention, you know, the governor had a strike force that was established, and the individuals that are associated with the strike force reopening team on the economic development force side and international were Secretary of State Ruth Hughes, Robert Allen, who's over at Texas Economic Development Corporation, and then Adriana Cruz, who's the governor's economic development and tourism director. Those individuals have been engaged in a big way. Here in Texas, we've actually a $12 million disaster located worker disaster grant that's been allocated at the local level to help with recruitment and retraining assistance. And so that's been allocated to the local workforce boards. $10 million skills development fund program that we had traditionally used in other resources, but we were very flexible in adapting to make sure that we can use that for small businesses. And I know Dale Robertson and his team are working hand in hand to make sure that that's going out there. Targeted outreach by the local workforce solution offices. And let me just take my hat off and say, Doug, thank you and your team for what you're doing at the local level. To the employers that are on this call, that's the boots on the ground. That's where the rubber meets the road at the local level. And so I encourage all of them to take advantage of the services that you guys have. But targeted outreach efforts right now, as been mentioned by Carlton in the sense of the skills gap, we're going to have to be flexible. We don't know what's around the corner, but being able to train to the employer's needs is going to be very, very important to us. And so using our labor market information, Mariana Vega and her team, good information there. The data that's coming from our UI team, Shanta Williams, she's the liaison with the local workforce solution offices. All that information that we have allows us to really pivot, listen to the employers, and then to address their needs as we reopen and get individuals back to work. Excited about the data that was presented by Tim for the community there. It looks like a lot of folks are ready to get back to work, and we're ready for that to happen as well. We're going to do it, as always been mentioned by the governor, we're going to do it safely and strategically, but we're going to get our Texans back to work in regards to, I had a conversation with Representative Schaefer early on, and he was talking about some of the numbers in the region there. And so the governor's approach has been to do it smartly. What's working in Austin may not be the same in other parts of the community here in Texas. And so we take the safe and the strategic approach, depending on medical advice, to make the best decisions as we reopen in that regard.
Commissioner, thank you very much. If I could throw one more question your way and also actually lead into our Q&A session. You used the word unprecedented. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Unemployment. Will we be able to continue to fund the claims, especially if there's another spike? And if so, what effect will this have on future tax? Will there be an increase in the tax?
No, bottom line is no, not for 2020. For 2020, tax rate is set. And so we in every Texan receive their benefits. And we have systems based on the wisdom and the wiseness of individuals for us, where we have processes in place where we'll be in a position to borrow if necessary to counter that, and then opportunities to pay that back as well. But to answer that question directly, you won't see an increase in 2020 from that standpoint. And as has been mentioned by the Comptroller, Representative Schaefer, Carlton, and a number of the individuals, a lot of the information is just too early to tell. We're not sure what's happening. The data has to come in, and we will take the approach that we always take in Texas, and that's to be wise about it. In my position representing the employers on the state, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that I'm always trying to balance the funding of the trust fund with the least burden on employers as possible. And so I'll play in that space from that standpoint to make sure that we're making a difference for those employers.
Commissioner, thank you very much. I'm asking you to look into the future and tell me exactly what's going to happen. I realize we can't do that, but as you said, each of our panelists is tremendous. They're subject matter experts. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for not only giving us the facts, but your own informed opinions and outlooks. This is very valuable, and I know our audience has appreciated it. May I turn this over to Tim once again for a Q&A session. Tim?
Thanks, Doug. Thank you to everybody who's on the panel today. Tremendous information and greatly appreciated. I'll start off with the first question. The central focus in our nation has been on the pandemic, and rightly so. What else is going on globally? And I think some of this was touched on during the discussion, but what else is going on globally that could have an effect on our economy that we should be paying attention to?
Want any of us to jump in, or how do you want us to handle that, Doug?
Anyone who would like to, you basically, if you unmute your line, I think you want to say something.
Okay, well, this is Glenn Hegar, Texas Comptroller. If you look across the world, first and foremost, so many governments in the world have some type of economic shutdown and lockdown, and then as a result of that, that causes unemployment, that causes supply chain issues for so many manufacturers, so many other companies here in the United States and Texas, and particularly also it has a significant impact. We've talked a lot about the oil and gas industry as consumption is down significantly worldwide. So that's why a month ago, a few weeks ago, when I was here having lunch with my kids, my two 12-year-olds and my 15-year-old, and we were having a supply and demand discussion about oil and gas prices, because that day it went to $1 something when we were having lunch. And then later in the day, my 12-year-old son and my 15-year-old daughter asked at several times, what are oil prices today? And I had to explain to them that at one point they'd almost got negative $38. And neither one of them could even begin to imagine how in the world does oil prices for the market for the next day go to negative prices. And, really it's an issue that, because demand is down worldwide, because the economy's being shut down, prices have been suppressed. And that's not just because of what was going on with OPEC and Russia and Saudis, but more so because of the pandemic. And so that's kind of one thing I was trying to highlight earlier, is that Texas being so intertwined to the global economy. And especially if you look at in so many sectors around the world, those that are part of the traditional marketplace employment are seeing unemployment, not just here in Texas, US, and around the world, but so many people who are not part of the traditional workforce that are really underreported. Most of those people have seen unemployment, and you're going to continue to see ripple effects. And my biggest concern as we look across the rest of the world is that there are so many countries that are emerging markets and undeveloped countries that don't have good sanitation, that don't have clean water, don't have running water. And so as the pandemic spreads in these other countries, obviously I'm very concerned what goes on here in Texas and what goes on in the US. But if you look at the impacts that those other countries could have, it could be very severe, and having significant number of people entering into poverty, significant number of people having disruptions in food supply, as we've seen here in our country. Producers are not able to sell their products because either the packing plants have to be closed temporarily. Also, they may not be able to get the employees to go out and harvest the crops. And so those are having significant issues, not just here in the US, which we're going to have grocery stores that are going to continue to be full of groceries. You just may not be able to get exactly what you want at the store. But my point being, in other countries, those are going to have significant issues. And I firmly believe those ripple effects, because of that, will continue to have a drag on our economy to some degree, because we're intertwined with the rest of the world.
I was say that even included within that, I'm excited about the relationships. The governor always talks about education, economic development, and workforce being the secret sauce to our success. And on the international side, Secretary of State Hughes, I know, has relationships, and the governor has an international team as well. And so the communication is going to be key, as Comptroller Hegar has mentioned. Those have ripple effects on our economy. And so our ability to have relationships with those entities in those international firms should play well for us. And I'm excited that we do have those relationships through the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you. Next question is going to be, does the combination of current unemployment and economic trends leave us at risk for inflation? And if so, are there efforts that can be made to positively impact this risk?
Yeah, I think that obviously, unfortunately, I think the commissioner can speak to this more on unemployment trends, but unfortunately, at least in my shop, we do think unemployment trends are going to continue. They've slowed substantially compared to what they were at the very beginning, but they're going to continue, unfortunately, as the ripple effects are felt in so many other sectors of the economy. But with far as inflation, I know the Fed is very not concerned. I mean, inflation is not something that's real high on the list, however, something that they're going to continue to watch and trying to make sure that we don't have significant inflation here in this country, unlike what you see in some other countries that are dealing with now. So I think really we have a lot more tools in our toolbox as a country to be able to deal with that. And so therefore trying to make sure that inflationary pressures do not continue to drive up.
Comptroller Hegar answered that question entirely. I wanted to share that we do have a labor market team. Mariana Vega may be on this call as well, and they're looking at unemployment numbers, and that's statewide. And so real good dashboard tools that are available for individuals to pick up on that information as the information comes available.
Timothy?
Thank you, gentlemen. That was a great answer. I'd like to call everybody's attention to a link that Dale Robertson posted in the chat to Skills Development Fund and resources for small business from TWC. Both great resources. I would encourage everybody to go out and take a look at those. And with that, I'll go to the next question. Will the Economic Development Council working together with our education system, will they be working together with our education system to provide potential new employees with upcoming needed skills? So I'll leave that to whoever wants to answer that question.
I can probably answer that. It talks about the economic development world, but I did mention that bringing workforce and economic development and education together is the secret sauce to a lot of our success. I know through the programs that Dale's talking about, you have an employer who wants to train individuals. That training is done through the local community college in that regard, and a lot of the recruitment efforts that are handled by the economic development organizations, the partnerships between the governor's office, the comptroller's office, the workforce commission, all of those are brought to bear so that we're giving the employer what they need from the standpoint of training, or what they need to do in terms of keeping their workforce there. But Carlton, if he's on the line, he may speak to that, and Dale may do so as well.
Thank you, sir. It looks like we've lost Carlton. Maybe I was hoping he might weigh in on that one. Thank you for the response. Kelly?
This is Kelly. I can tell you that a lot of chambers and EDCs are looking at virtual types of solutions right now. They're emerging in the marketplace very swiftly. So one of the products we're looking at is called Workbay. And the reason we're looking at that is because of not just us, but the other organizations like Junior Achievement, Boys and Girls Club, that are in the classrooms on a regular basis providing skills development classes on free market and the importance of capitalism as a positive word. And, you know, I believe that perhaps next year we may not be in the classroom and have those relationships the way we've had in the past. So we're looking at how do we bring these services virtually and partner with our schools. I can tell you we met with our largest school district on Tuesday afternoon and started having those conversations, and they continued last night with some school board members. So, you know, we're trying to get out in front and anticipate worst case scenarios to bring positive solutions to the table and tie our school districts together and help our employers be able to keep those relationships alive, because we know 80% of our kids are going to stay in our East Texas area, and we want to be able to help those kids get to good jobs and for them to have the skills and the soft skills needed to be successful.
Hey, Doug. Dale Robertson here. Thank you, Commissioner Demerson and Representative Schaefer. So again, Dale Robertson, Interim Director of the Office of Employer Initiatives. We mentioned the coordination between economic development and education. I'd like to add that, you know, the resources I shared in the chat includes information about our community college partners. And we've made available up to $10 million for community colleges, as well as, I think I've been asked to share my video. Been asked to share with community college and workforce boards, made available up to $10 million in the Skills Development Fund. And it allows for some of that creativity to take place that you mentioned about virtual training, short-term training, and to meet the needs of businesses right away. So in addition, we have grant funds. I know Carlton mentioned earlier the Jobs and Education for Texans program. We're working to get some of those funds out now to those awardees. And that brings the ISDs, the independent school districts, into the mix where, you know, the JED Advisory Board met and decided that, you know, a lot of what we saw in those responses and those applicants were the types of equipment that the ISDs and independent and the Institutes of Higher Education, the community college were asking for, would support our economy as they continue to grow and build a workforce and upskill workers. So from the high school level into the college level into the workforce. So I think we're doing well to position the state and local communities with resources to meet the demand as we reopen. With those resources we made available, and we continue to be available. So if you go to the links I put on the side, it will indicate, some of the other information we're coordinating with as well, to make sure that our economy continues to grow and we rebound very quickly. Thank you.
Well done, Dale. Thank you.
Doug, that was the last of the questions that we had from the chat. Thank you, everybody, for the responses. Great information. We will make this video available once it's rendered, and I'll send a link out to everybody so you can cross-post the link as well. It'll be posted on easttexasworkforce.org once it's available, and you're welcome to cross-post. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Doug, for closing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've used almost 90 minutes of your time. I think it was worth it from my perspective. I hope it was for yours. I want to thank our very talented and distinguished panelists for taking their time and, again, giving us their insights as well as the facts and figures. Climbing out, ramping up, beginning anew. I think you heard from our speakers that as Texans, we're picking up, and we're picking up right where we were in mid-March. We've got a long way to go. It won't be over tomorrow, and it may be a while before we're back at our January numbers with the record low unemployment, but we're coming back. I would like to thank our guests. As you can tell, they're in here side by side with us directly in the fight. Ladies and gentlemen, all I can say is buckle up. It's time for a reset. We are coming back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Mary Ann, did you want to provide a closing comment?
Other than I just wanted to echo Doug's comments and thank everyone that participated in coming together and the panelists getting all this information out to our audience. This is great information that we can use just to support, our plan, as Doug said, to reset. And we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we connect with you as partners and continue to serve our workers out there that are desperately in need of services and ready to come back to work. So thank you all so much for everything that you do every day. And thank you so much to our staff that continue to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining us. Again, like Doug said, we've consumed 90 minutes of your time, so we know it's valuable, and we'll close the meeting at this point. Thank you again for everybody's participation, and we look forward to getting this information out to the public. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.